It was supposed to be a simple renovation job. An old family home, abandoned for decades, finally sold off to a distant relative who had no intention of living there. Mark Turner, a 46-year-old contractor with 2 decades of experience, had seen his share of eerie houses. But there was something different about the Wilkins property. The neighbors crossed the street to avoid walking in front of it. Curtains twitched from nearby windows, as if everyone was just waiting for something to happen. Mark laughed off the uneasy feeling tightening his gut. Money was money. Besides, his crew was waiting on him. The house, an 1800s Victorian, groaned under the weight of time. Floors sagged, windows were cracked, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. It was during the second week of demolition that Mark's crowbar struck something unusual beneath the rotting floorboards of the parlour. A hollow thud that echoed differently from the usual creaks. "What the hell is that?" his foreman Dave muttered, leaning over. They pried open a wide section, the smell hitting them first. Stale, damp earth mixed with something worse. Something that made Mark's stomach churn. Beneath the boards, half buried in dirt, lay a wooden coffin. Not a fancy, polished one. This was crude, nailed shut with iron spikes. The wood blackened with age and damp. "It's probably some family pet," Mark offered, though his voice cracked. "They used to bury animals in the house. It was tradition." "That ain't no pet's coffin," Dave shot back, his face pale. "It's too big." For a moment, Mark considered calling the police. But curiosity, that stupid human flaw, gnawed at him. They worked the coffin free, dirt crumbling away in chunks. It was heavier than it looked, too heavy. His arms trembled with the effort. Dave cursed, glancing nervously at the windows as if expecting someone, or something, to be watching. "We open it, we're done," Dave said. "If it's a body, we walk." Agreed. Mark nodded, swallowing hard. They pried the lid open together. The rusty nails shrieked against the wood. What they found inside made both men stagger back. There was no body. Instead, the coffin held dozens of small porcelain dolls, each dressed in faded funeral garments, their glass eyes staring up blankly. Some were cracked, others pristine, but all of them carried an eerie human-like expression, as though frozen mid-scream. "Jesus Christ," Mark whispered. "What the hell is this?" "I've got a bad feeling," Dave muttered, already backing away. "This ain't right." Mark felt it too, an oppressive weight in the air. He reached in, against his better judgment, and picked up one of the dolls. The moment his fingers closed around it, a cold shiver ran up his spine. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. "We need to put it back," Dave hissed. "Now." Mark nodded, dropping the doll as if it burned, but the doll's head snapped toward him, a hairline crack appearing where there had been none. The rest of the day spiraled into chaos. Tools went missing. One of the crew, Kenny, swore he heard whispering from the walls. Another claimed he saw a woman in black standing in the window of the parlour. Mark, exhausted and rattled, decided to call it. "We're done for today. Everybody out." That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He kept hearing faint tapping sounds, like someone lightly rapping on his bedroom window. Every time he checked, there was nothing. But when he finally drifted off, he dreamed of the dolls, their tiny mouths opening wide, releasing a chorus of shrill screams. The next morning, Mark returned to the house alone. He had to see it again. Maybe his mind was playing tricks. Maybe the exhaustion was catching up with him. The house sat silent, the sun barely penetrating the grime-covered windows. He forced himself back to the parlour. The coffin was gone. "No," Mark whispered. No, no, no. He ran his hands through his hair, spinning wildly. Where the hell did it go? The sound of something dragging echoed from upstairs. Mark froze. His breathing grew shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet betrayed him. He climbed the creaking stairs, hands trembling. At the end of the hall, the master bedroom door was ajar. He pushed it open, heart hammering. There, in the center of the room, was the coffin, pristine now, polished like new, and beside it, a figure dressed in black mourning clothes, veil covering her face, humming softly. "Who's there?" Mark croaked. The woman slowly turned. Pale hands reached up, lifting the veil. There was no face, just smooth, blank porcelain, the same as the dolls. Mark stumbled back, choking on air. The woman raised her finger to where her lips should be. Shh. The next thing he knew, Mark was falling. He crashed through the banister, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through his leg. He tried crawling, but the humming was everywhere now, echoing from the walls, the floors, the very air. The front door burst open. Dave stood there panting. "I had a feeling. I had a damn feeling. Come on." Mark didn't need telling twice. He dragged himself out, the humming following until the door slammed shut. They sat outside, breathing hard, staring at the house. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. The Wilkins house was demolished weeks later, the ground salted. No one spoke of it again, but sometimes, late at night, Mark still hears the humming, and in the dark corners of his bedroom, glass eyes seem to glint. It started with a casual conversation over dinner, a gathering of old friends reconnecting after years apart. The laughter was genuine, the nostalgia thick in the air. Until Simon, always the quiet one, leaned in with that look, the one that meant he had something real to say. "You ever hear about the abandoned funeral home out by Hawthorne Road?" he asked, voice low. Everyone fell silent. It was as if the name itself carried weight. "My uncle used to work there," Simon continued, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. "He told me things that don't feel like stories anymore." The room tensed. Even Michael, the most skeptical among them, sat up straight. "They buried someone alive there." The words lingered in the air, heavy and chilling. A nervous chuckle came from David, trying to shake off the creeping unease. "Come on, Simon, that's just some urban legend," David scoffed, though his voice betrayed him. But Simon shook his head. "No, my uncle was there. He heard the screams, days after the burial. It was supposed to be a prank. The kind drunk young men pull, just to feel something. The idea was simple. Sneak into the funeral home, find the infamous coffin, and take a photo inside it. But nothing about that place felt simple once they crossed the rusted gate. The hinges groaned like a warning, the metal cold even in the summer air. The air was colder, thicker. The walls were yellowed with age, every corner creaking with memory. They joked less with every step until their laughter died altogether. Only the sound of their breathing remained. The funeral home had been abandoned for decades, but the smell, a nauseating mix of rot and mildew, clung to the air. They passed rows of decaying caskets, toppled chairs, and shattered photo frames of people long dead and forgotten. Then they found it. The coffin. It sat beneath a crumbling staircase, half covered in an old tarp. Faded flowers rotted nearby, their scent sweet and sour. Simon stood frozen. staring at it like it stared back. "That's the one," he whispered. Michael, desperate to break the tension, laughed and lifted the heavy lid. The creak echoed through the vast empty hall. Inside, the satin lining was stained dark. A smell, thick and musty, crawled into their lungs. "See? Just wood and cloth," Michael scoffed. But the moment he stepped back, they all heard it. A faint knock. From inside the coffin. "Don't screw around," David barked, his voice cracking. "I didn't," Michael stammered. Silence returned, until another knock came, louder, deliberate. Panic spread like wildfire. But Simon didn't move. His face had gone pale, his lips trembling. "They buried him, but he was never dead," Simon muttered. "My uncle said they could still hear him, for days." The air grew heavier. It felt like the walls were closing in. David wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking. "We need to get out," he whispered. "Now." Before anyone could react, Simon placed his hand on the coffin. "We shouldn't have come here," he whispered. "We woke it up." Michael, shaking off his fear, grabbed Simon's arm. "Stop! There's no it! It's just a box!" Then the lid slammed shut. Violently, without anyone touching it. The sound was deafening. Dust filled the air. Michael fell back, gasping. A low growl echoed from within the wood. "I heard that," David whispered, his eyes wide. "Tell me you heard that." They did. Every one of them. "It doesn't want us here," Simon whispered, tears welling. "He's still in there." Then they heard something that made their blood run cold. A faint voice, muffled, pleading. "Let me out, please. I'm still here." Panic became survival instinct. They bolted for the door, but the house was no longer the same. Hallways stretched, doors slammed shut before their eyes. "It's playing with us," Michael shouted, his voice hoarse. The light from their phones flickered, then died. They were swallowed by darkness. Breaths became rapid, shallow. Simon fell behind, staring back at the coffin. "I have to stay," he said, voice hollow. "My uncle made me promise. Someone has to keep him company." "Don't be insane!" David screamed, grabbing Simon's shirt. But Simon smiled weakly. "I hear him calling me." With one last glance, Simon turned and walked back, toward the coffin. "Simon!" Michael yelled. "God damn it, don't!" The last thing they saw was Simon placing both hands on the coffin's lid, and then it opened for him. They never saw Simon again. By dawn, authorities found Michael and David wandering the fields, incoherent, their eyes hollow. They spoke of coffins, knocking, and a voice calling from beneath. No one believed them. The funeral home had been abandoned for 30 years, the records long lost. Except for one thing. Inside that rotting building, under the collapsed staircase, the coffin sat open. And inside, a fresh set of footprints led in and never came out. Yet, what the officers didn't report, what they were too afraid to admit, was the whisper they all heard when they entered the building. "I'm not alone anymore. Some say you can still hear knocking if you stand by the old funeral home at night. Some say it's the wind. Others know better." I never thought the most ordinary call of my career would spiral into the most haunting memory of my life. It was late October, one of those dull grey mornings where the sky itself felt too heavy. I had just finished my shift at the small town funeral home where I worked as a mortician. Before I could change, my phone rang, a panicked voice on the other end. It was old Mr. Lambert from the outskirts of town. "I need your help," he whispered hoarsely. There's something wrong with the coffin we buried last week." The very mention of a coffin was enough to put me on edge. Coffins, for me, were ordinary, until they weren't. I grabbed my coat and drove out, the whole way wondering what kind of mistake he was talking about. As I pulled into his isolated property, my gut churned. The place reeked of something old and rotten, even from outside. Mr. Lambert stood by the front porch, his face pale, hands trembling. What he said next made my blood run cold. "I heard her," he stuttered. "My wife. I heard her scratching from inside the ground." At first, I stared at him, thinking this must be the cruel trick of grief. But Lambert's eyes, bloodshot and wild, told a different story. "Please, just check. Please," he begged. I found myself nodding slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. I knew his wife had died of a heart attack just a week ago. I had prepared her body myself. We grabbed shovels and made our way to the back of the property, where a makeshift burial had been done. His land was private, and he had refused to bury her in the town cemetery. I never questioned why, until that moment. We dug in silence, each scrape of the shovel sounding louder than the last. Then the wooden top of the coffin appeared, worn, splintered, and stained darker than I ever remembered. With trembling hands, I pried it open. My heart dropped. Mrs. Lambert's eyes, once shut, were wide open, staring directly at me. Her nails were bloodied, torn from clawing at the inside. The horror of it made me stumble back. Mr. Lambert screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the empty field. "She was alive," he cried, collapsing to his knees. "I told you!" I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. There was no doubt in my mind she had been dead, cold, pale, stiff, when I closed that lid. But the sight in front of me told a different story. She had woken up. Somehow, somewhere deep inside, guilt clawed at me. Had I made a mistake? Had I buried a living woman? We called the police. An investigation followed, and the body was taken for another autopsy. The town whispered. People pointed at me like I was some kind of butcher. Every night, I stared at the ceiling, haunted by the sound of those bloody nails scraping wood. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I needed to know what had happened. Days later, the coroner gave me a call I'll never forget. "There's something you should see," he said, his voice flat. I drove to the morgue, my chest tight. When he pulled back the sheet, I gasped. There, carved deep into her chest, was something I hadn't seen before. Letters, words, scratched in by her own hands. One single word stood out, below. "What does it mean?" I muttered. The coroner only shook his head, but something about that word burrowed into my mind. Below, beneath, buried. That night, unable to fight the impulse, I returned to the Lambert property. Mr. Lambert didn't stop me. He just stared, empty and broken. I found myself staring at the hole we had dug days ago. What was she trying to say? My eyes scanned the dirt walls until something caught my attention. A small gap, unnatural, like the earth itself had been disturbed. Shovel in hand, I started digging. Inch by inch, the hole widened until the metal edge hit something solid. I froze. It was another coffin. I stood there, breathless, staring at the decayed wood barely holding together. This wasn't hers. This was old, ancient. But why was it there? Who had buried another coffin beneath Mrs. Lambert's grave? With shaking hands, I forced the lid open. The stench was unbearable, but what I saw made me stagger back, bile rising in my throat. The body was wrong, twisted. Its face, half decayed, was frozen in a scream, its fingers long, almost claw-like, as if whoever it was had died clawing at something or someone. But what sent chills down my spine was the chain wrapped around its neck, leading upwards, snapped and broken. Had it pulled her down? I stumbled out of the pit, the sound of my own breathing deafening. Mr. Lambert stood by the edge, silent, staring at me. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear the land wasn't ours. It was the old Carver estate. I knew that name. Everyone did. The Carver family was said to have vanished a century ago, their land left abandoned. Whispers of curses, of unnatural deaths, followed that name like a shadow. It made sense now. The grave, the chains, the scream frozen in death. And then I understood. She hadn't been scratching for help. She had been fighting whatever was below, whatever was dragging her back. The authorities sealed the land, calling it unstable ground. But I knew better. I left that town, packed my bags and disappeared. But no matter how far I ran, the nightmares followed. Night after night, I'd hear the scratching, those desperate, bloody nails tearing at the wood. I'd wake up gasping, sweat-drenched, the sound still echoing in my ears. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't dug her up. Would the ground have swallowed her whole, erased every trace of what we found? Would she have become part of that thing beneath? Even now, I'm not sure what we uncovered that night was ever meant to be found. But one thing I know for certain. Some coffins are not meant to stay buried.